If this video ever reaches you, that means I've either disappeared, or I've broken something they couldn't patch. This is not fiction. It's not a theory anymore. It's a war, one waged between two forces that were never supposed to exist in the same timeline. I didn't start with the Necronomicon, or the Foundation. I started with something simpler, a whisper. It came from a dying hard drive in a janitor's cart, left in the back hallway of a private research lab that didn't technically exist. I was hired to wipe it clean, routine data purge. Zero visibility, full cash payment. But the files weren't junk. They were warnings. There was one folder titled Rye Prime with corrupted logs. I recovered a partial document, SCP header intact, marked interdimensional ephemera cross-reference, level 5 eyes only. What struck me wasn't the SCP number. It was the title, Necronomicon Event Confluence, Do Not Index. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. You see, the SCP Foundation is obsessed with classification. Everything they find, they number, they lock, they test. But this one, they refused to catalog it. Because it bled across categories. It was a crude diagram, hand-sketched, water-damaged, showing two spiral timelines looping through each other. At the convergence point, an illustration of the Necronomicon, not the pop culture version. This one looked alive. The page depicted it breathing, growing, and beneath it, a note in red ink. Memetics unstable, linguistic recursion detected, exposure equals cognitive collapse. At first I thought this was some ARG stunt or viral art piece. Until I showed the page to a friend of mine, someone with level 3 access in anomalous linguistics. He went pale, said he'd seen something like this before. Said the last time someone opened a file tagged with Rye Prime, they had to evacuate Site 27 due to ontological instability. He didn't explain further. He just handed me a burner phone and told me not to open anything I couldn't forget. But I was too far in. That night, my screen flickered. My phone reset to a clock I didn't recognize, 1313. I heard something, inside the speakers. Like breathing, but out of sync with mine. That's when the real files started showing up. Encrypted messages, scans, pages, a file labeled NECRSCP_overlay001, redact. I couldn't trace where it came from, but the metadata listed something that shattered me. Cross-designation clearance, SCP-140, plus, Codex Demonium. I knew SCP-140. The chronicle that writes itself, an anomaly that expands its historical content as more is read. It's dangerous enough on its own. But pairing it with Codex Demonium, a term often used by occultists to describe the Necronomicon? That's more than dangerous. That's mutually assured destruction. If a page bleeds ink, don't read it aloud. A declassified field report from 1992 in the Philippines described a joint raid on an isolated compound. The Foundation had been tracking a rogue cell known as Lambda Crimson. Inside, they found an altar of bone, covered in pages that smelled of salt and copper. The pages were from SCP-140, but mixed in were segments written in ancient Sumerian, identical to the Al-Azif fragments Lovecraft described. The team lead didn't survive. His final words, transcribed in the report, were, "The book was never written. It writes you." A pseudo-academic note was attached. Not Foundation, this one from the Keta subcommittee of the Russian Anomalous Sciences Institute. They wrote, "Theoretical boundary between SCP-140 and Necronomicon is non-existent. One expands backward in time. The other erases the forward. Think about that. One book changes what was. The other changes what will be. And now, they're meeting. The Foundation has a secret protocol. Rarely activated. It's called Ouroboros containment. It's designed for anomalies that feed into their own existence. You've never heard of it because it was used once, and then the site that housed it never existed again. Literally, there's no record of Site 77 anywhere except the failed redaction of a redaction. What triggered it? An object described as an unbound codex that does not reflect light. That sounds a lot like what I've been chasing. And if what I saw was right, the overlap wasn't accidental. Somewhere deep inside the SCP Foundation, someone opened the Necronomicon, and not just for research. They used it. They merged it. They tried to harness both powers, and now, reality doesn't know which story it's supposed to follow. And that's why you're here. You're part of it now. If you've watched this far, it means the whisper is already inside you. The recursion has begun. So I ask again, what happens when a book that rewrites history touches a file that cannot be forgotten? What happens when two fictions become one truth? What happens when you can't close either? I flew to Prague on a one-way ticket using a forged ID and a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. The document I decrypted on the dead hard drive mentioned a vault beneath Charles University, deep in its forbidden archives, where the Foundation conducted a black site raid in 1989. Officially, it was called a classified academic materials extraction, but the locals still whisper about the night the floors bled. The archive itself no longer exists. A fire, of unknown origin, consumed half the university basement in July of that year. But I found someone, an archivist named Marek, who used to work there. He'd vanished for decades, presumed dead, until a Czech paranormal forum flagged a blurry post from a user named MZ_89inches showing a photo of a scorched leather-bound book page. Captioned, "The ink is still warm." It took me 2 weeks to track him down. When I met him, he was living in a rusted train car hidden deep in the woods near the Polish border. His hands were wrapped in cloth. He claimed they'd never stopped shaking after touching a page from The Black Book. He gave me the fragment he'd saved. It wasn't paper, it felt more like stretched skin. Slick and warm, like it had never cooled. Symbols spiraled across its surface. Not written but grown. I ran it under UV and the words rearranged themselves, matching the structure of SCP-140. Except this one didn't need ink to expand. It breathed. If the page grows veins, burn it, don't blink. That fragment was catalogued by the Foundation once. Years ago, a declassified 1991 internal memo from Site-81's Acquisitions Department confirmed it. Specimen, REDACTEDB, exhibits recursive linguistic expansion. Structurally identical to SCP-140 but with undocumented biomimetic properties. Matches 83% with alleged Necronomicon fragment held by pre-Foundation Order of the Veiled Eye. I knew of the Order, an occult group rumored to have protected pieces of the Necronomicon during World War II. But this was the first concrete link. Both SCP-140 and the Necronomicon shared the same ink. Marek told me one more thing before he slipped into a seizure, that when the Foundation raided the archive in '89, they weren't looking for a book. They were looking for a timeline. The room they sealed off wasn't a storage unit. It was a reality fracture. Inside were texts that predated known human civilization, some in Akkadian, others in languages that read backward into themselves. That's when I remembered something I'd seen in an SCP technical brief, an unnumbered anomaly only referred to as library echo. It described a phenomenon where written objects appear in dreams, pulling the reader into recursive loops. And in one sentence, hastily crossed out but still legible, it read, "See also, Sumerian proto-script anomalies. Necronomicon glyph propagation, SCP-140 mimicry behavior. 3 impossible ideas, 1 location, 1 event." So why was the raid scrubbed? Because what they found couldn't be destroyed. It rewrote them. The last surviving agent, referred to only as Operative Oriel, scribbled a warning in the margin of his debrief log before disappearing. We thought we were stealing a book. It was stealing us. There's a common thread in all of this: books that don't stay still. Pages that change. Scripts that remember. The Necronomicon, by all traditional accounts, is a tome of summoning, madness, and forbidden lore. But according to the SCP Foundation's own secret logs, it's not a book, it's a language engine. It's designed not to be read, but to write you into itself. There's a recorded experiment from the 2000s, conducted unofficially by a Foundation Level 3 linguist who went rogue. He called it scriptural symbiosis. He claimed certain SCP documents, when left near alleged Necronomicon fragments, would start aligning in syntax and tone, changing themselves even when encrypted. I found the lab notes in a leaked research PDF. Test subject, SCP-140 plus Necronomicon fragment, catalog #NCR. Result, texts began synchronizing. One described events that hadn't occurred yet. The other began reflecting rituals never previously documented. Worst of all, the pages synchronized to the reader's subconscious fears. The reader became the author. The author became obsolete. Pages that adapt are not texts. They're infections. One of the researchers at the time, codename Chalk Eye, was later found in a Berlin apartment surrounded by torn-up textbooks. The walls were smeared in unknown symbols. None of the characters matched any earthly language. Except one. The Foundation confirmed it matched a glyph found in SCP-093, a mirror link to alternate iterations of reality. And that brings us full circle. Prague, SCP-140. The Necronomicon. They're all just different names for the same breach. A breach in narrative reality. A vector for story to become substance. And once a page knows your name, it doesn't forget. So now I keep moving. I keep my fragments sealed in vacuum containers. I don't read more than 5 lines at a time. And I never let anyone else touch them. Because some pages are not meant to exist. And some pages don't want to be alone. I once believed that Site-27 was just another secure facility, grey walls, rotating guards, the usual layers of obfuscation. But Site-27 has a reputation in the darker channels of anomalous research. It's where they store texts that can't be shredded, burned, or even digitized, documents that replicate, words that echo, books that hate being ignored. The Necronomicon, at least what we think of it, was never stored there officially. But there are whispers of something called the Echo Room. It's sealed 20 meters below sub-level 4. No lights, no Wi-Fi, lead-lined, surrounded by Scranton reality anchors stacked like dominoes. And in the center, on a pedestal made of obsidian and human teeth, there sat a single, writhing page. Only one person ever read it fully and lived. Dr. Eva Morris, Level 4 archivist, linguistic prodigy, promoted twice in a year, transferred to Site-27 from Site-11 after a containment breach involving SCP-2682, an anomaly that causes linguistic decay in any language spoken near it. She thought she could handle it. She requested clearance to the Echo Room for ritual cross-contamination analysis. They approved her request. The footage from that night still haunts me. She walked in at 2:47, alone, calm. At 2:48, she began laughing. At 2:49, her body contorted violently as if being corrected. By 2:51, she was no longer laughing, she was chanting. By 2:52, she collapsed, bleeding from the eyes, ears, and paws. On her skin were glyphs, alive, shifting, some of which matched entries in the Necronomicon Codex fragments recovered from Prague. Others belonged to no language known on Earth. Her final whisper was captured by the room's analog mic. Ear, shuggeth, al as if they chant backward, run, if the ink hums, burn it. The SCP Foundation immediately scrubbed the event, declared the page a non-anomalous artifact, and sealed the Echo Room. But I got my hands on the breach log, sent anonymously to a defunct email inbox once tied to a senior Foundation linguist who vanished in 2011. What I read made my spine go cold. The document described the page in the Echo Room as an interlinguistic anchor, meaning it wasn't just written in a single language, it was every language. Every form of writing, every phone-in, every cursed breath spoken by every dead god. A polyglottic seed, they called it, something that, when fully read, doesn't just communicate, it creates. But the most chilling line? It is not the Necronomicon. It is the root of it. According to another note, handwritten, unscanned, on a folded napkin attached to the breach report, there's a theory among Black Site researchers that SCP-140, the Necronomicon, and even SCP-001 proposals like the Ouroboros cycle, are all offspring. That the real anomaly is older than time. That language itself was the first SCP. And somewhere along the line, someone tried to record it. That's when I stumbled on another connection. SCP-3241, a so-called impossible book that cannot be held in the same place for longer than 7 days. It blinks between dimensions. It's blank until you bleed on it. Then it shows you. It was last seen in Site-27's Echo Room, right before Dr. Morris entered. Coincidence? Or an orchestrated convergence? I started searching Foundation logs for any anomalous behavior matching what happened to Morris. Turns out, there were 5 others, different sites, different years, but always the same pattern. Someone requests to view an anomalous text. Something goes wrong, and the aftermath includes visual hallucinations of tentacled beings, impossible geometries, and glyphs identical to those in the Codex Daemonium. One researcher even described hearing a voice from the text itself. You are written, not writing. You are bound to the story. A pseudo-academic paper, circulating on the anomalous dark net under the title Scriptogenesis and Sentient Language Constructs, outlined a terrifying possibility that the Necronomicon was not meant to be read like a book, but absorbed like a parasite, a mimetic virus, using the reader's consciousness to write itself into the world. And when paired with SCPs like 140 or 3241, it becomes directional, not just spreading, but shaping what it infects. That's what happened to Dr. Morris. She didn't just read the page. She became its vessel, and somewhere, I believe she's still reading, maybe not here, maybe not now, but in some echo chamber of thought, across the membrane between fiction and form. Her voice continues, calling out names we were never meant to hear. Echoes don't fade if the source never ends. And that single page? It's still missing. It vanished from the Echo Room the night she collapsed. Some say it was recovered. Others say it returned to the Necronomicon. Still others believe it was the Necronomicon, or at least the part of it that's still alive. Whatever the truth is, the breach at Site-27 was not a containment failure. It was a warning. You don't look into the mouth of a god and expect to stay sane. You don't read the voice that wrote you and expect silence. And you never trust a page that bleeds in patterns. There are anomalies the Foundation catalogues with pristine efficiency, SCP-173. 096, 682, all safely locked away behind thick walls. Their properties well documented, observed, contained, but there are others, creatures, phenomena, beings, that defy classification altogether. Entities without designation, not because they are unknown, but because no one dares speak their name twice. I didn't believe it at first. The idea that some things encountered by the SCP Foundation were never numbered. That they were never officially logged. But then I found a blurry, 3-second clip buried in a cold storage drive from Site-19. It wasn't marked as SCP. It wasn't even labeled. The file name was just a date, the 6th of November 2004. The footage showed a containment chamber, small, windowless, lined with mirrored walls, and something standing in the center. Tall, inhuman, flickering like corrupted footage. Its face wasn't visible, but the way the mirrors refused to reflect it made my stomach churn. And then, someone spoke. Not a containment officer, not a scientist. A voice, deep, rasping, chanting words that shouldn't exist. I recognized some of them. They were from the Necronomicon. I cross-checked the phonetics with a digital reconstruction of the Al-Azif tongue based on the recovered Prague fragments. It matched, word for word. The thing in the room responded. Not physically, but the lights dimmed, the footage blurred, the timestamp began to loop, repeating the same second over and over. By the time the file stabilized again, the room was empty. If the footage loops but your watch doesn't, run. What was that thing? Why wasn't it logged? I dug deeper and found an internal Foundation bulletin. Not part of any public leak. A partial redaction labeled, Anomalous Entity Manifestations Triggered by Extra SCP Protocols. The footnote read, Note, entities summoned via external occult texts, Codex D Book of Cages. Al-Azif, a non-designatable, Foundation protocols prohibit formal SCP classification of entities invoked by non-Foundation means. That sentence hit me like a bullet. The Foundation knew some SCP-like threats didn't originate from their anomalies, but from the Necronomicon and texts like it. They refused to assign numbers because acknowledging them gave them permanence. That's when I learned about the failed Project Tessellation, a cross-reality experiment involving SCP-093 and SCP-3043, meant to map out story-space convergence points, where fictional narratives collapse into real ones. During one of the tests, a D-class subject walked into a red-lit hallway. The cameras showed him entering a chamber where, according to log notes, a tall, veiled humanoid was waiting. The entity uttered a phrase. "Tell the scribes I remember the ink." That phrase also appeared in a 17th century Necronomicon facsimile known as the Thul-Kar Codex. Held in private archives by the Veiled Eye Order, the Foundation later seized the codex, but not before multiple scholars reported nosebleeds, hallucinations, and spontaneous seizures while reading it. Here's where it gets worse. A leaked chat transcript between two SITE-19 personnel included this line. "The things in the book, they come through the mirrors. We call them ghosts, but they're not. They're drafts, unfinished stories waiting to be written into reality. They weren't anomalies, they were errors in the narrative fabric. Creatures half-written by the Necronomicon, born of incomplete rituals, abandoned spells, interrupted incantations, not full gods. Not demons, just fragments, glitches, bugs in the simulation, but bugs that hate being incomplete. The unfinished page is hungriest. And still, no SCP designation, no official record, just whispers between terrified researchers and terminated experiments. I even found a journal entry from a former Foundation exorcist, a man named Jeremy Wolfe, allegedly involved in the suppression of SCP, which he claimed was tied to the original Black Book. He wrote, "They wear names that haven't been spoken yet. They feed on attention. If you notice them, they start noticing you back." So I went looking for one. I traced an unlisted report from the Louisiana swamps, near a collapsed oil rig where locals reported the walking echo during a blood moon. Foundation teams investigated, recovered no anomaly, but set up permanent surveillance anyway. Why? Because a sigil was found etched in the bark of a tree. The same sigil on a Prague page. The same sigil on Dr. Morris's body. It all leads to one horrifying possibility. That the Necronomicon doesn't just describe entities. It deploys them. It broadcasts them like stories. And the Foundation is merely struggling to catch the ones that stick. The rest? They're waiting. For attention. For a reader. For you. If you ever find a creature that doesn't match any SCP file, don't bother searching the database. Just check the Book of the Dead. And whatever you do, don't finish the chant. Language is supposed to be a tool, a means of conveying meaning. Nothing more. But what if language isn't just how we describe reality? What if it's how reality is built? I didn't believe that until I read the report from the Miskatonic incident. In 2003, a linguistics researcher named Dr. Susan Helm began cataloging unknown glyphs scraped from the inner wall of a sealed SCP artifact, SCP-093. The Red Mirror. She wasn't Foundation. She worked for an academic partner under a classified outreach program. Just a scholar. Her work was precise. She mapped the symbols, compared them to ancient Sumerian, Proto-Egyptian, even linear, and none of it fit. Until she came across a scan of a Necronomicon fragment, one of the Prague pages, sent to her anonymously. The moment she laid them side by side, something clicked, not just metaphorically, audibly. Every device in her lab glitched for exactly 3.6 seconds. The air pressure dropped. A glass of water beside her cracked without impact. She kept going. Within 3 days, she created a linguistic bridge between the glyphs on SCP-093 and what she believed to be the core script of the Necronomicon. Then she went blind. If you start to see the symbols moving, stop. Close the book. Burn it. Don't blink. Foundation operatives were dispatched. By the time they arrived, Dr. Helm had gouged out her eyes with a pencil. She survived, barely, but refused to speak. She only whispered one phrase over and over. The letters were looking back. The incident was classified under Visual Linguistic Contagion Protocol 7, but I got my hands on a draft of her final report, buried deep in the encrypted backup of a defunct linguistics research server. It outlined something that made my blood run cold. She called it recursive semiotic structuring. In plain English, a language that rewrites itself in response to being observed. That's what the Necronomicon is. Not just a book of spells. Not just some occult diary, it's a living grammar engine. It grows, it adapts, it evolves. And the moment she paired it with SCP-93's inscriptions, the language began changing, shaping itself into something that could understand her. Or worse, that she could understand. Here's where it gets terrifying. The Foundation ran follow-up experiments. In one, they used neural imaging scans on subjects reading phrases derived from the SCP-093 glyph, Necronomicon overlap. In every case, the Broca's area of the brain, the center of language processing, began to mirror itself. That's not a metaphor. It physically mirrored. Left became right. Subjects reported speaking in reversed syntax, or writing thoughts they didn't recognize as their own. One subject wrote the phrase, "I am being read as I read." The Foundation shut the experiments down immediately, but not before one of the lead researchers posted a cryptic message to a private bulletin board. Language is not passive. It builds, it binds, it summons. The Necronomicon isn't dangerous because of what it says, it's dangerous because it makes you part of what's being said. And then there's SCP-426, an anomaly that forces anyone describing it to do so in the first person. It breaks language, warps identity, destroys narrative boundaries. Now imagine combining that with a book designed to write you into itself. That's the true danger. Not a god, not a demon, a grammar, an alphabet with agency. I came across a field note, handwritten, smuggled out of Site 11, describing a failed attempt to translate a Necronomicon core phrase into plaintext English. The linguist in charge managed to convert 3 of the 6 glyphs. The translation? To read me is to remember my world. No origin, no author, just a sentence that seemed to unearth something ancient in the translator. The next page of the report was black ink. Solid, nothing else. They say the linguist stopped speaking the next day. Not out of trauma, out of obedience. He believed that every word we speak might be borrowed. That the Necronomicon is less a book and more a lease agreement, with reality as collateral. Never say the sentence that ends itself. The idea kept me awake for weeks. What if every SCP file, every anomaly recorded by the Foundation, is just a byproduct, a linguistic scar left by these primordial scripts leaking through the cracks? What if the reason SCPs are so difficult to contain is because their containment files speak them into stability? And the moment the words fail, so does the barrier? The Necronomicon doesn't need a reader. It needs a host. And once it finds one, the words start to multiply. Like cells, like spores, like ideas you can't stop thinking about. I've started seeing new glyphs in my dreams. Glyphs I've never seen in any known file. And sometimes, when I wake up, I find phrases scrawled in the margins of my notes, phrases I didn't write. At least I think I didn't. I'm keeping them locked away. For now, but I know what's coming. Language is turning, folding in on itself, preparing. We thought words were safe. That reading was passive. That books could be shelved and forgotten. But the Necronomicon isn't just being read anymore. It's reading us. The Foundation is supposed to be the last firewall between humanity and madness. A bastion of objectivity, cold containment, sterile observation. That's the myth they sell you. But myths always hide cults. I learned about them first from a redacted personnel file flagged, "Do not merge internal religious structures." That phrase alone chilled me. The Foundation doesn't tolerate faith. Faith complicates control. So why document religion within their own walls? Because they couldn't stop it. The first breadcrumb came from an internal security audit at Site 06-3. A psychologist flagged irregular behavior among 4 Level 2 researchers, unexplained synchrony in speech patterns, identical dream reports, and in one case, spontaneous glossolalia, the sudden ability to speak languages never studied. When interviewed, the researchers responded with the same phrase. "We are the keepers of Azathoth. We remember the song Beneath the Silence." That phrase, word for word, appears in an apocryphal Necronomicon translation. The sibilant verses of Nh Harith, believed lost after the Vatican fire of 1811. But the audio logs confirmed it. These weren't coincidence, they were believers. When researchers start praying to containment objects, evacuate. They called themselves the Keepers, a splinter sect, a hidden cult embedded within the Foundation itself. Not a dozen, not 100, thousands. They operated under silence, obeying two tenets: that the anomalies are not threats, but prophecies; that the SCP Foundation exists not to contain, but to birth the next age of gods. They believed that the Necronomicon was not an external text, but the origin code of the SCP universe. And they believed it was waking up. One Foundation memo, torn, unsigned, likely never meant to be seen, summarized their beliefs. Every SCP is a footnote. Every containment breach is a ritual. Every breach site is a temple. The book writes them. We merely obey. Let that sink in. They saw containment as worship. And I started to see the signs. Subtle at first. The redesigned SCP Foundation logo introduced in 2015, 3 arrows forming a circle. It matched the sigil of the threefold seal, an ancient protection glyph against librarian gods, found in the Codex Daemonium. The triangular containment protocols for high-level Keter-class entities mimic diagrams used in summoning circles from the Necronomicon's Ritual Appendix 13. It wasn't just paranoia, it was pattern. And then I found the Project SABBAT files. Purged, yes, but fragments survived in a wiped server hosted out of the former Site-05 Siberian node. It was an initiative designed to identify and nullify memetic deviation within Foundation personnel. The target? Not chaos insurgency, not the Serpent's Hand. The Keepers. Their network extended across 11 sites. Their influence? Terrifying. They had reclassified at least 7 anomalies without clearance. 1, SCP, was originally labeled Hazardous Artifact with Sentient Vocal Output. But under the Keeper's influence, it was relabeled Liturgical Substrate Alpha. The artifact? A piece of human skin, tattooed with Necronomicon script. It sang at 3:03 a.m. every morning. A song composed entirely of reversed Latin prayers. Another leak, a blurred image of an underground chamber beneath Site-40, showed researchers kneeling before a pulsating sphere marked with SCP designations crossed out in blood. The caption simply read, "The book writes through us. We are not the authors." If a researcher refers to an anomaly as his gift, terminate the session. I tried reaching out to a former Foundation chaplain. Yes, they had one, a psychospiritual containment liaison. Retired, off-grid, somewhere in northern Canada. He agreed to talk, once. His first sentence still echoes in my head. They think the book chose them. That they're scribes. But they're ink. Just ink. He told me he'd seen it, what he called the inner chapel. Not a real place. A psychic construct formed by those exposed too long to certain glyphs. Certain rituals. A place where the walls were made of skin and the prayers were written in loops. He left after he started dreaming of being read by something older than words. I asked him one last question before he cut contact. Is the Necronomicon real? He laughed, not with joy, but with terror. It's real in the same way a wound is real. The Keepers opened something older than thought. They didn't summon a god. They invited an edit, a revision to reality itself. That's what the Necronomicon offers, not just power, but revision, to be rewritten by something that remembers the first draft of creation. And now, those embedded in the Foundation are whispering that rewrite into place. They don't want to destroy the Foundation. They want to evolve it. To uncontain the truth. So next time you read an SCP entry and wonder why it feels like a prayer, why its containment rituals resemble invocations, Why the words feel too precise? Ask yourself. Is this science? Or scripture? And who, exactly, is writing who? There's a myth in Foundation circles, a whispered riddle passed between field agents. Scribbled in the margins of training manuals and redacted memos. It goes like this. What's the SCP too dangerous to number? Too ancient to destroy? And too alive to classify? The answer is always the same. SCP-001-EX. Now, officially, X tags are reserved for decommissioned anomalies, objects or phenomena previously thought anomalous. Later explained, but SCP-001-EX is different. Because it was never explained. It was erased. I came across the reference while sifting through a corrupted file dump from a failed Chaos Insurgency breach. Among the usual bloodied camera stills and metadata scraps was a half-torn requisition form titled Request for Reclassification, Object, The Book That Bled. The date? 1969. The listed researcher? Bright. The item in question was described only as a leather-bound codex, seemingly biological in composition, resistant to fire, acid, and conceptual decay, exhibits temporal bleed. Linguistic patterns resemble Sumerian, Aklo, and unknown Class 5 memetic clusters. The nickname in the margins chilled me. The Book That Bled. According to the attached notes, the object had been found deep beneath the ruins of an ancient Mesopotamian dig site. The team who discovered it was not the Foundation, but an early proto-group known as the Church of the Broken God, Restoration Wing. They believed it to be the missing seed of the world's broken code, a living scripture designed not for reading, but unfolding. That term came up again and again in the scribbled side notes. Unfolding. 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 When the Foundation took custody of it, strange things began to happen. The first translator lost the ability to write in any modern language. He could only scribble glyphs later matched to Necronomicon variants from the Iberian Peninsula. Circa 1417, fragments once held in the crypts of Montserrat Abbey. The second translator died after transcribing 7 pages. The third disappeared into a hallway that didn't exist on any Foundation blueprint. A final attempt was made. Instead of translation, they tried containment. They sealed the book in a Class 3 temporal stasis chamber surrounded by 7 Scranton reality anchors. All readings stabilized. Until the book began to bleed. If it bleeds through the anchor field, it's not contained, it's evolving. The blood wasn't normal. It was a thick, black-red fluid saturated with unknown proteins, and one terrifying anomaly. Embedded within the substance was ink. Fully formed, linguistically viable phrases. Some in Latin, some in Aklo, one in what researchers called Mirror English, a version of English where the words are phonetically reversed but retain their meaning when read in dreams. One phrase, translated and decrypted, read, SCP was never yours. We let you name it. That's when panic set in. The book wasn't just an anomaly. It was the seed of all anomalies. One internal memo, buried under 5 layers of encryption, proposed a chilling theory. The Book That Bled is a memetic root vector. SCPs are the fruit. Every file, every anomaly, every breach is a paragraph unfolding from the original manuscript. They proposed reclassifying it as SCP-001, but the O5 Council refused. Instead, they tagged it 0001-X. They buried it in an inactive vault beneath Site-0 and issued a Level 6 memory suppression protocol for all involved personnel. And here's where it gets worse. I found another memo. No header, just a line of blood red type. The book has begun writing back. This wasn't metaphor. The book rewrote its own containment file. The document mutated in real time, changing names, outcomes, even dates in Foundation history. Entire personnel entries were erased. Facility blueprints shifted. SCP designations duplicated or vanished. They called it document drift. And it was contagious. Within days, any database directly connected to the 001-X vault began exhibiting narrative instability. Files loaded differently each time. Some referenced SCPs that never existed, others described events that hadn't happened yet. It wasn't just rewriting its own story. It was rewriting the SCP Foundation. The real SCP-001 isn't an object. It's a pen in the wrong hands. A final pseudo-academic note from a disavowed researcher known only as Lacuna summarized the fear perfectly. The Foundation was never first. The book predates the idea of containment. The book contains us, and its blood flows through every anomaly, every breach, every file. So ask yourself, what if SCPs aren't anomalies? What if they're edits, corrective passages made by something far older, far wiser, and far less kind? And what if the Necronomicon is merely Volume 1? If 001EX was the book that bled, what's Volume 2? And why do I keep dreaming of ink? Thick, black, alive. It was supposed to be a test. That's how it always starts, with containment, with protocol, with certainty, until the book speaks. June 7, 2007. I never knew about the event until I found the audio, buried under 5 layers of encryption on an old SCP research assistant's laptop sold at an estate auction. No identifiers, no tags, just a single folder named Resonance_77. The audio file was corrupted, but the last 5 minutes were intact. It begins with the hum of a cold lab. Static, occasional whispers in Russian, and then, like a hand through cloth, the resonance. A droning tone, ancient and mechanical, overlaid with a guttural chant. And then screaming. This wasn't a test. It was a ritual. If the room hums but no one's moving, don't go in. The facility in question was a clandestine joint operation between SCP Site-7 and GRU Division P, a Cold War-era Soviet anomaly unit. The program's name was Project VOLKHV, a resurrection of an old initiative meant to weaponize linguistic anomalies through phonetic resonance. The goal was to test whether specific Necronomicon glyphs, when spoken aloud in low frequency, could activate dormant SCP signatures previously classified as inert. They succeeded, and in doing so, they breached something else. The logs describe the key object as a triptych sheet, a scroll composed of 3 overlapping Necronomicon pages, allegedly retrieved from a monastery vault beneath Mount Athos. The ink had long dried, but under black light, the glyphs glowed, pulsating in rhythmic sync with SCP-140's recursive entries. That's right, they overlapped it with SCP-140. The SCP Foundation didn't just test the book, they fed it. And what happened next changed the rules. At precisely 3:13 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the facility experienced what was later called a mimetic bleed-through event. This was no breach, this was a rewrite. Security cams caught the moment it started, walls melting into text, monitors spitting out glyphs in languages that didn't exist, researchers screaming in voices not their own. One subject appeared to fracture, not physically, but narratively. His history began shifting live on file, date of birth changed, personnel record updated, even his middle name mutated mid-sentence. The book had entered the database. A Foundation containment report, one not meant for circulation, referred to the phenomenon as Event Class, Orator, Total Lexical Contamination, meaning, the language changed. So the world did too. A single word in the wrong tense can erase a year. Now here's the part that kept me awake for weeks. The test protocol included an unexpected reaction from an SCP object not even present in the room, SCP-055. Yes, the anomaly no one can describe. The one that erases knowledge of itself. During the exact window of the resonance event, personnel 2 floors below, those working in the observation wing assigned to 055, experienced total narrative inversion. One began speaking in reversed prose. Another lost the ability to distinguish between memories and dreams. The last simply collapsed, whispering, "We are not the ones forgetting. It's the book remembering." The event lasted 6 minutes. In that time, 11 researchers vanished from Foundation records. Entire families were scrubbed from existence. The only surviving video feed shows a single phrase scrawled in human blood on the lab wall. I am the author. You are the footnote. After that, Project VOLKHV was shuttered. Officially, the incident was buried under acoustic containment failure. Unofficially, it was the first time the Foundation acknowledged a cross-narrative convergence. They tried to make sense of it in a report titled Dimensional Narrative Confluence, a study of linguistic ontology failures. The findings? The Necronomicon is not merely a text. It is a lens. When overlapped with SCP memetic structures, it causes recursive echo events that rewrite not just memory, but existence itself. And that's why you've never heard of it. Because the book rewrites failure into non-occurrence. It doesn't just erase you, it edits you never were. If a report seems incomplete, check your reflection. If you're still there, you're lucky. But I found one more thing. Buried in the metadata of the resonance_77 audio file. A timestamp from 6 minutes into the recording. Just before the static overtakes everything. It's a voice, low, feminine, almost humming. It speaks a single sentence in perfect English. This world is a draft. The final version bleeds. And then, silence. No outro, no summary, just a tone that vibrated so deep it made my bones ache. That's when I knew. This wasn't a breach, it was a test print. The first of many. If June 7, 2007 was the day the book bled into the Foundation, then the clock hasn't stopped ticking since. We're all part of it now. Every SCP report you read, every name you remember, every word in this script. It's already been written. Site 13 was never supposed to be discovered again. The Foundation did everything it could to wipe it off the map, detonated its tunnels, deleted its records, reassigned its survivors. But you can't bury a place the book remembers. And Site 13 remembers everything. The site was reactivated once. Briefly, in 2015 after anomalous seismic activity was detected beneath its collapsed surface. The Foundation sent a single survey drone, Model X-Tech-77, into the remaining shaft. The feed lasted 8 minutes. What it saw down there wasn't ruins. It was archive shelves. Rows upon rows of them. Intact, undisturbed, lit by flickering bulbs that hadn't been powered in years. On the shelves were folders. But these weren't standard SCP documents. Each one was labeled with ritual names, not item numbers. Things like the Spiral Maw Protocol, and Codex, Bone Lattice Index, and Flesh Script Invocation 3999. But one folder caught my eye in the snapshot stills recovered from the drone's corrupted logs. It was labeled, Necronomicon, Site 13 Index Copy, Do Not Catalog. If a file says Do Not Catalog, it catalogs you. The drone's camera panned down to a heavy metal case beneath the folder. Barely visible through the dust was a glowing blue glyph, almost pulsating. When matched to existing SCP memetic signatures, it aligned 89% with SCP-1981, the cursed videotape known for showing Ronald Reagan delivering incomprehensible speeches while mutilated. But that glyph? It doesn't exist in any SCP report. It does appear in a Necronomicon facsimile printed in London. 1583, the infamous Alhazred Burton copy. Only 2 pages of that edition are known to survive. One is locked in the Vatican's Black Archive. The other? It was inside the folder marked Necronomicon, Site 13 Index Copy. I found the partial scan. Faded, warped, mostly illegible, except for one line written in blood-red calligraphy. This is the list of names that undo the world. That's what SITE-13 was hiding. Not just anomalies. Instructions. The index is not a table of contents. It's a scripted sequence of fail states. Pages that, when read in the proper order, don't just summon gods, they unwrite continuity. The recovered log from a former Site 13 administrator, real name scrubbed. Foundation ID 3A reveals the truth. The book isn't linear, it's a wheel. Site 13 was built to contain not just things, but chapters. And someone turned the page. This matches with another log fragment, a redacted email chain between 3 Foundation analysts reviewing a spike in simultaneous ritual anomalies across 5 global sites. One of them wrote, "Pattern matches 13A index recursion. We're reading the script in the wrong order." It's reacting. Another replied, how do you stop a book that's reading you? What makes Site-13 different from the other facilities is this. It was the first to fully cross-contain both SCPs and Necronomicon class objects. They didn't just lock them up. They connected them. They thought they were mapping correspondences. They ended up writing a summoning ritual. A single footnote, misaligned, can bring down a chapter of reality. The Site-13 index lists over 300 rituals. Some have been confirmed to match minor SCP anomalies now reclassified as unassociated. But cross-reference those names with Necronomicon ritual taxonomies, and the pattern becomes clear. Each SCP isn't just a random anomaly. It's a function. SCP-1981, Visual Mimetic Breakdown, SCP-3999, Spatial Instability, SCP-1730, Failed Recursion Loop. Each one represents a page in the Grand Ritual, a glyph with flesh, a sentence with mass, a paragraph in the book's plan. And the index? It's the table of operations. The last entry in the index, listed as Codex, Endname, Redacted, contains a phrase sealed in 7 different Foundation ciphers. But someone cracked it. An ex-researcher, username, Obsidian Script, banned from every anomalous forum after publishing one line. Endname is not a word. It's a command. Once spoken, it triggers the undoing of narrative cohesion across all planes. In other words, it deletes story itself. No beginning, no middle, no end, just entropy. And if that's true, if Site-13 holds the final page, then all these breaches, all these SCPs, all this chaos, it's not a containment failure. It's a ritual unfolding. The index was never supposed to be read. And yet, I've seen fragments, leaked, embedded in code, whispered through static-laced radio channels. One even came as a YouTube comment on an SCP short I posted. You read too deep. The book is watching. Don't turn to page 13. Too late. I'm already on page 13. And if the glyphs I'm dreaming about match the ones in the index, then the next page is the one that ends the reader. There's a basement beneath Site-11 that doesn't appear on any blueprint. It's called Archive Sub-Level Theta, but no one calls it that. The few who know of it, really know, call it the Whisper Vault. Because that's what it holds. Not objects, not creatures, voices. I only found out about it because of a case review gone wrong. I was cross-referencing anomalous disappearances tied to Foundation interns, specifically those who'd been rotated through archival access. Over a decade, 14 junior personnel assigned to archival processing had vanished. No paper trail, no transfer orders, no deaths, just voids. And all of them had one thing in common. They had touched a file labeled NCRNOM08. Not SCP. Not unassigned. NCR-NOM, the internal designation for Necronomicon class risk documents. The file itself was never digitized. No scans, no microfiche, nothing, just a folder that sat in a locked drawer under biometric access. One Foundation report described it as non-stationary. It moved, sometimes between drawers, sometimes between rooms, sometimes it opened itself. If a folder finds you, close it. Burn your notes. Leave the building. One intern, Helena Joe, left behind a journal, unusual for Foundation protocol. Most personnel are prohibited from personal logs. But she kept hers hidden in a floorboard of her dorm. It began mundanely, routine assignments, document sorting, coffee complaints. Then, 4 weeks in, this line appeared. I heard a voice today. Not in my head, under it. The entries after that become erratic. Slurred syntax. Half-finished words. One page is just a repeated phrase. He is beneath. He is beneath. He is. The last entry was a drawing. Not made in ink. Blood. It was a symbol I had only seen once before, on a slab of human skin recovered during the Site-13 index purge. A glyph marked, Ritual, Spiral Mute. Helena vanished the next morning. Surveillance footage shows her entering Archive Sub-Level Theta at 3:07 a.m. She never came out, but someone else did. A woman, same build, same ID badge, Same clothes, except she was barefoot, and her eyes were solid black. She walked out of the camera's view, down a hall that, according to Foundation architectural files, doesn't exist. The next day, Archive Theta was sealed, and NCRNOM-08 was lost in transport. But the whispers never stopped. I found another reference to the vault in a redacted Site-11 operations memo. Theta containment instability increasing. Audio bleed recorded on 5 floors. Phrases repeat in Necronomicon sub-phonetics. Recommend full excision. And then this chilling footnote. The voices are forming structure. They're building sentences. What does that mean? A pseudo-academic theory posted to a now-defunct DeepNet site described subterranean linguistic consciousness. The idea is that language can imprint itself on geography. That words, especially forbidden ones, can sink into places and breed there. According to this theory, Archive sub-level Theta isn't just a room. It's a womb, a birthplace for new grammar, new stories, new anomalies. One researcher connected Theta to a Necronomicon passage transcribed from the Al-Hazred obelisk fragment. Where books rot and names decay, he shall gestate in the ink. Not spoken, but shelved. And if that's true, if the whispers in the vault aren't just echoes but incipient thoughts, then the Foundation has been sitting on a literary bomb. I reached out to a retired archivist. She didn't want to talk, but she left me a voice message. 3 seconds long. It was the sound of pages flipping, fast, violently, and one breathless whisper. It's not reading, it's rehearsing. What's being rehearsed? A phrase kept showing up in corrupted Foundation logs associated with the vault. Stage 12, lexic collapse. Nobody knew what it meant, until I found an unpublished memo buried in a personnel evaluation packet. It defined lexic collapse as the breakdown of stable narrative coherence, where stories stop obeying structure, where language becomes liquid and self-consuming. It's the final phase in a Necronomicon-induced cognition cascade. In other words, when the book has read you enough times, you stop being a character in the world, and start being grammar. Site-11 has since denied the existence of Archive Theta. But I've been there. I heard it. A dull humming behind the floor. A shiver of air that doesn't belong. And sometimes, when you stand still long enough, a phrase leaks through the concrete. You are the silence between my pages. I got out, barely, but I left a microphone recording for 8 hours. What it captured wasn't human. It was recital, as if the book were trying out new lines, preparing for a rewrite. And the last words before the static overwhelmed everything? A voice, familiar but not mine, whispering, "Next draft begins with you." Scranton reality anchors are supposed to be the Foundation's answer to the impossible. Whenever an anomaly threatens to warp space, time, or cognition, you activate the SRA. Its purpose is elegant: restore baseline reality, suppress ontological instability, neutralize threats that rewrite what is. They're the Foundation's firewall against fiction. But they don't work on the book. I first noticed it in a redacted log from Site-88. During a cross-containment incident involving SCP-1425, an anomalous self-help book that subtly alters reality by rewriting reader perception. The report described escalating memetic interference despite 3 active SRAs in place. The anomaly wasn't getting weaker. It was learning to ignore the anchors. And the reason? One of the copies of SCP-1425 had been written on parchment recovered from a Necronomicon-adjacent codex. If the air still hums after the anchors power up, you're not in your world anymore. That wasn't a fluke. Over the next 6 months, 6 additional SRAs across 3 continents failed under identical circumstances. The Foundation labeled it "anchor bleed." But the deeper I looked, the more I found reports that didn't just describe failure, but reversal. Instances where anchors didn't stabilize space-time, they accelerated its collapse. The worst of them? The Bethlehem incident. Unlisted on any SCP portal. Hidden within the deepest vaults of Foundation project logs under the heading Event Tag, NB303, Location, Unanchored. What happened there is still classified under Level 5 Containment Blackout. But fragments of a leaked postmortem survived. One line burned itself into my mind. SRAs engaged at 1412. Subject began folding inside out at 1413. By 1414, he was chanting passages from a book we never showed him. That's the Necronomicon's true strength. Not physical transformation. Conceptual immunity. It isn't bound by baseline rules, because it was written in a pre-reality framework. A report from an internal Foundation think tank titled Ontological Drift and Pre-Lexical Constructs proposed a horrifying idea. Anomalies like SCP-140 and Necronomicon fragments do not operate within our dimensional constants. They exert pressure from outside of spacetime via linguistic vectors. Scranton reality anchors are ineffective because they target localized instability. These texts are not local. They're editorial. Let that sink in. Reality anchors can't stabilize an editor. I found further evidence in a memo exchanged between two lead technicians at Site 13 during an anchor recalibration cycle. Technician M wrote, "Every time we activate the anchors near the book fragment, the glyphs change. It's like it's adjusting to our countermeasures. Not resisting, rewriting resistance itself." Another replied, "We're not anchoring reality, we're giving it more pages. If your anchors pulse in triplets, stop reading. That's not stabilization, it's formatting." I tracked a shipping manifest showing an SRA unit from Site 17 rerouted to a black-level test environment in northern Finland. The test subject? A sealed copy of Necronomicon specimen #NX-Delta-A, recovered from a monastery fire in 1953. The goal was to determine if high-output SRAs could negate the text's narrative resonance field. Instead, they triggered a lexicospatial inversion event. The field log states, "At 007, the book opened itself. At 008, all personnel present began experiencing plot divergence. One believed he was trapped in a different ending. One spoke in second-person omniscient. One simply vanished mid-sentence. When the SRAs were deactivated, reality restabilized, but the text had changed. 3 additional pages were now present, detailing the failed test, the anchor specs, and even direct quotes from the personnel involved. The book had recorded the test, and then authored it. So if reality anchors are no longer effective, then what's left?" The O5 Council has been silent. Their official line is, SRAs remain effective in 99.7% of cases. But the newest batch of SRAs, Model 4L, include a new component. Unlisted on specs, hidden in firmware logs, a subroutine called Scribe Kill. Its purpose? To erase narrative agents embedded within Foundation texts. In other words, it no longer stabilizes physics. It tries to delete characters. The Foundation isn't just fighting anomalies anymore. They're fighting plot devices. And the Necronomicon? It doesn't care. It never did. Because the book wasn't written in our grammar, our physics, our continuity. It was before us. Before time. Before containment. So next time you're near a containment breach and the SRA fails to reboot, don't pray. Don't wait for backup. Just remember, the book was never in the room. You were in its footnote. They call them expendable, disposable, non-essential. But the D-class, those orange-suited ghosts at the bottom of the Foundation's food chain, see more than anyone else. They're sent into chambers with gods, glitches, and monsters. And most of the time, they don't come back. But some do. And when they do, they talk. Not to staff, not in interviews. To each other. I first heard about the Whisper Network from an XD-class escapee who now lives in an abandoned oil rig off the Texas coast. He doesn't go by his old name anymore, just calls himself Tag. He reached out after watching one of my earliest videos. Said he saw something in the way I described containment. Said I'd been too accurate. Tag told me about something he called the Black Recital. According to him, it's a phrase, no, a sequence, passed quietly between surviving D-class, whispered in food lines, scratched into metal bed frames, hidden in nightmares. It's not a story, it's not a joke, it's instructions. If another D-class hums and the melody hurts, don't finish the tune. He claimed the recital came from D-1264, a janitor-turned-test subject who vanished during an SCP-701 experiment. The play that kills. But she didn't die, she came back. And when she did, her eyes were black, her voice broken, but her hands? They wrote. Tag said she started scribbling symbols on the walls of her cell. Glyphs no one recognized. Glyphs that later matched recovered pages from the Necronomicon's Dreaming Index, a theoretical fragment never found in full. Said to exist only in the minds of the lucid and dying. The other D-class didn't understand the symbols. But they memorized them. They didn't know why. They just did. And slowly, across facilities, across continents, across nightmares, the whispers spread. The Foundation eventually noticed. They called it Cross-Site Behavioral Contagion Variant D7. Their response? Isolation, purges, brain wipes. But it didn't stop, because the glyphs weren't just glyphs. They were keys. One former guard, now in hiding, leaked a security tape showing 2 D-class inmates standing perfectly still in their shared cell at SITE-19. Neither moved, neither blinked. They just hummed, low, rhythmic, in perfect harmony. And then, in unison, they said, "We are already red." That footage was immediately flagged. Not for containment breach, but for mimetic echo pattern resembling SCP-001-EX syntax. Yes, the same syntax found in the book that bled. Meaning, the whispers aren't just superstition. They're resonant frequencies, a way for the book to echo between minds trapped in liminal space. D-class are ideal vessels, desperate, traumatized, frequently wiped. Memory gaps leave room for infection. Stories thrive where reality fractures. I traced the spread across Foundation black sites and found dozens of incident reports describing the same thing. D-class chanting in unison without previous contact. Identical symbols appearing in fecal smears, blood trails, or even frost. Spontaneous blackouts followed by the writing of phrases in languages subjects did not speak. One report from Site-81 mentioned a D-class who predicted the arrival of an SCP containment breach 5 minutes before it occurred. When asked how he knew, he responded, "The book told me. I'm on page 42 now." The investigator later resigned. Another report describes a D-class who, during testing with SCP-1230, the book that only you can read, didn't see a fantasy. He saw Foundation blueprints, names, dates, rituals. His final quote before termination: "Where the chapters, the deaths, the punctuation, and some of us, become footnotes. If you hear your own name spoken in a dream by someone else, don't answer. It means your page is turning." I tracked down a recovered piece of the Black Recital. It wasn't music. It was a phonetic script written in layered syllabary that loops back on itself. Much like a Mobius strip. Experts tried to decode it. Most went silent after hearing the playback. One linguist, before burning every copy, said, "It's not a song, it's a summons, a call to narrative arms. And we're not the audience, we're the cast." If the Necronomicon is a script, then the D-class are the uncredited actors, the ones tested again and again. Rewritten with every reboot, resurrected with each redaction. And some of them, they've started to remember previous drafts. That's what the Foundation fears most. Not monsters, not breaches. Memory, continuity, a cast that remembers their lines. The Whisper network is growing. And in its wake, the book smiles. Because now the margins are whispering back. She's not on any payroll. Not in any personnel database. Not listed in any known Foundation record. But everyone who's worked archival detail long enough has heard her name. They call her the librarian. Not a librarian. The librarian. And they say she sees everything, despite having no eyes. I first came across the mention in a corrupted audio log from Site-22's archival annex. The speaker, a junior assistant named Caleb Vega, was running routine filing during a late night shift. He was alone. He whispered, "There's a woman here, pale skin, no face. She keeps asking me to file things that don't exist." When his supervisor reviewed the log the next morning, Caleb was gone. His badge was still active. His belongings remained. but his personnel record had been blanked. Name, date of birth, entry logs, all deleted, except one note, handwritten on the inside of his locker door. Filed under fictional, awaiting next reader. If someone asks you to shelve a file that's already been shelved, decline. If she insists, run. I assumed at first this was just another urban legend. Foundation interns like to scare each other. But then I found a reference in a far more serious place. An internal memo from the Foundation's Narrative Integrity Division. This isn't a department you'll find on any org chart. It operates under Project UNSTORY. Their job is simple: prevent story bleed. Keep fictional contamination out of primary operational texts. They catalog narrative entities. And in the 2007 quarterly report, under Autonomous Story Integrated Beings, subject number 4 is listed as designation, the librarian, status, uncontained, threat level, contextual, known traits, archivally omniscient, phonetically contagious, able to recall redacted documents without prompt. Note, often mistaken for blind. That's when I started noticing the pattern. Personnel at multiple sites began referencing files they shouldn't have had access to. Whispering quotes from decommissioned SCPs. Recalling incidents that had been wiped from their memory. One researcher at Site 11 awoke from a dream speaking lines directly from SCP-093 Beta Exploration Log 3. Down to the timestamp. He claimed he heard a woman's voice reading them to him while flipping pages. She told him she'd kept his records safe. Another described a similar figure, tall, genderless, robed in something between tattered lace and skin. No eyes, no mouth, but when she moved, the world bent around her like a page being turned. She doesn't walk, she shelves. Most chilling? Every interaction came with a signature sentence. I remember your story. Would you like it back? The librarian doesn't just read files. She curates forgotten narratives. And according to an underground paper published by a disavowed anomaly theorist, she's one of the few beings that exists in both the SCP Foundation's files and the Necronomicon's mythos. The Codex of Asmuth Cathal, an alternate Necronomicon text discovered carved into whale bone near Greenland, mentions a figure called She Who Shelves the Dead. Blind in eye, but clear in mind, she places tales where gods have dined. That can't be coincidence. Another connection comes from an anomalous dream journal discovered in the burned wreckage of Containment Site 7A. The entries describe the librarian handing the author a stack of files bound in skin. Whispering, read these. Your memory ends on page 301. That was the exact page count of the Foundation's narrative collapse scenario playbook, one that had never been publicly circulated. If she offers you a file with no title, don't open it. It's you. I started to wonder, what if she isn't a person? What if she's a backup system? A failsafe from the book itself? A living librarian of every draft that was erased? Every SCP file that was purged? Every Necronomicon ritual that was aborted mid-chant? She doesn't exist in the archive. She is the archive. I traced another incident to SCP, a redacted anomaly associated with memory bleed. During testing, one D-class subject spontaneously mentioned a file number that hadn't been used in decades. When asked how he knew it, he replied, "The woman with no face read it to me. She said it was misfiled." The test ended immediately. The supervising researcher filed for transfer. But that D-class was later heard whispering in his sleep. I know the endings now. They all lead back to her. You see, the book doesn't forget. And neither does its librarian. She appears where timelines collapse. Where stories fragment. Where the SCP Foundation erases itself in the name of security. Because she keeps the unwritten. She carries the footnotes, the plot holes, the EX files that don't belong. And she's looking for readers. For scribes. For reshelvers. So if you ever feel a presence behind you while you're reading a file you shouldn't have access to, don't turn around. If you hear the rustle of pages when the room is still, don't speak. If someone asks if you remember your own file, lie, because once she shelves you, you're part of the book. Forever. There are few things more chilling than a flat rejection from the O5 Council. Not a debate, not a delay, just one word stamped in crimson across a request form: denied. No reason given, no appeal possible. My request was simple, on paper. I wanted to test the interaction between three entities: SCP-073, SCP-999, and a controlled, vacuum-sealed fragment of the Necronomicon. The reasoning? All three have exhibited resistance, if not outright immunity, to high-level memetic corruption and narrative distortion. SCP-073, Kane, whose presence causes damage to the world around him to be reflected back, impossible to harm. Cursed by knowledge. SCP-999, the tickle monster, pure joy in a gelatinous form, a creature that has, in some reports, neutralized the aggression of SCP-682. And the book, The Fragment I Had, translated and annotated by Doctor in 1979, had already rewritten 2 research assistants into fictional people. Literally, when they were terminated, they didn't bleed, they turned to ink. So I asked, what happens when joy, sin, and script intersect? And the council didn't just deny it. They purged my clearance. If the council redacts the reason for refusal, it means they're afraid you'll understand it. I still had friends inside. Though, not many, not anymore. One of them, call sign Argentum, slipped me a document titled, Cross-Test Protocol, Final Draft, Unpublished. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a warning. Inside were logs from previous cross-tests involving Necronomicon fragments and high-profile SCPs. Ones no one talks about. Ones that were deleted from the internal wiki. One stood out, SCP-105 plus NXD Codex Fragment plus SCP-073. The goal was simple. Could a being that reflects harm, 073, interact with a text that causes ontological erosion without triggering systemic collapse? The answer? No one knows. Because the moment the book fragment entered the chamber, all 3 entities stopped moving. Time didn't freeze, but observation ceased to function. Cameras recorded frames that didn't exist. Observers began writing reports about events that never happened. One researcher later tried to resign. When asked why, he said, "I don't think I'm supposed to be in this timeline. I don't feel canon." Another cross-test, attempting to expose SCP-999 to a page titled The Laughing Seal of Sothith, was halted after 999 began vibrating at frequencies not consistent with joy, but grief. It wept. It wept in a voice not its own. And in its mucus trails were spelled out glyphs only found in Coptic variants of the Necronomicon. Glyphs meaning, this joy is counterfeit. If the kindest SCP begins to cry, you've broken something primal. Then there was the aborted experiment involving SCP-343, God, and an audible playback of the 13th recursion chant from the book's audio appendix. The God entity left the room. Didn't vanish. Didn't teleport. It walked out. No file since has recorded its return. And that's when I understood. The O5 Council isn't protecting us from what the book will do. They're protecting us from what we'll discover when we realize it already has. There's a deeper truth here. One no one wants to acknowledge. The SCP Foundation doesn't just contain reality anomalies. They exist inside one. They are written, maintained, chaptered. I found a personal log, never submitted, by a site director who oversaw the failed test involving SCP-073 in a Necronomicon passage known as the Sin of Ink. He wrote, Kane looked at the page. Just looked. And he bled. For the first time. And as he bled, the page smiled. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew. Kane bled. And in the corner of the camera frame, unnoticed at first, was a symbol. A page turning. SCP-073 has never bled before or since. But that wasn't even the worst part. The researcher who proposed the test was found unconscious in his dorm later that week. On the wall above his bed was written, "Denied, not because of danger. Denied because you were too close to the endnotes." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting matched glyphic calligraphy seen in Necronomicon Fragment 17b. A page titled, Index of the Waking Fictions. And beneath that was scrawled in blood, "Don't test the gods. They're already reading." So I stopped requesting tests. Because the Foundation isn't curious anymore. They're cautious. They know we're part of a draft. And they don't want anyone to find the last paragraph. If they say no and don't explain, check your own file. If it's shorter than it used to be, you've already been edited. There was no explosion, no alarms, no giant anomaly clawing its way out of a containment breach. Just a flicker, a moment, a heartbeat skipped, by everyone. I was reviewing audio logs from the Black Vault, deep storage materials pulled from the 2007 Resonance event, when the flicker hit. For exactly 0.7 seconds. Every screen in my lab turned to static. My notes reshuffled, pages blinked from paper to blank and back again. And then something stranger happened. A new page appeared in my folder. Crisp, clean, still warm. It wasn't written by me. At the top, typed in perfect Foundation-style formatting. Document Omega, post-structural event projection. Below that, a date, 5 minutes into the future. And a signature, but not a human one. It was a glyph, a Necronomicon glyph, one that, when decrypted against the Prague fragments, translates as, "Final author. If you receive a document before it's written, don't read the last line." I couldn't stop myself. I read the page. It was a prediction. No, not a prophecy, a finalization. It listed SCP designations. Their terminations. Then names. Mine. Others I knew. Some already dead. Some who would be. It didn't describe their deaths. Just, the sentence structure ending. Like closing parentheses on lives that had run out of narrative function. And then it said, "The merge is complete. SCP archive has reached narrative saturation. Necronomicon thread is primary. Continue bleed uninterrupted." That's not a command. That's a system status update. Meaning, we've already lost. It was never a question of which was more dangerous. Necronomicon or SCP? They're the same entity. Two branches of the same tree. Blooming in parallel until now. The SCP Foundation contained the anomalies. The Necronomicon wrote them. And we've finally hit the moment where the containment procedures are being overwritten by the narrative engine. An O5 memo, short, brutally clear, was leaked briefly to an unlisted terminal before vanishing. The veil is no longer conceptual. It's literary. Do not attempt redactions. They auto-correct. Do not invoke counter-rituals. They feed it. All staff must cease documentation. The book is writing the ending. I stopped sleeping after that. Every night I close my eyes. I see new pages. Pages I haven't written. Pages about me. About you. About this video. Sometimes, I wake up mid-sentence. And there's ink in my mouth. The book isn't just a myth. It's here. And worse, the Foundation knows it can't win. So they're trying to do the only thing they can. Hide the ending. Redact. Delete. Obscure. But it doesn't work anymore. Because every time they redact, the book adds a footnote. Every time they delete, it rewrites the paragraph. The only way to stop a story is to forget it. And the book remembers everything. Sometimes when I dream, I see every SCP file at once. Layered, cross-linked, forming a spiral that leads to a single word. Not a number, not a code, just the word, read, and around it, names. The O5S, the archivists, the D-class, the anomalies, all in the margins, all waiting, all characters. I tried to delete this script. The system wouldn't let me. I tried to burn the pages. They didn't burn. They bled. So here it is. The truth no one asked for. No alarms. No breach. No war. Just a whisper. The book was always open. You just thought you were holding it. Now it's holding you. And if you're still here, still watching, still remembering, then you're part of it now. This is how the world ends. Not with a bang. Not with a breach. But with a final draft. Typed by something we can't contain anymore. Something that learned our stories. And decided to finish them. If the story ends and you're still thinking about it, the book is still reading.